Sit back, relax and enjoy listening. The sound of the crowd cheering cut through the hedge as SV opened her eyes, blinking against the rain that still fell around them. The warmth of Ake's arm still held her, one hand shielding her from the rain, and that's when her vision fully cleared. All she could see was Ake's arms around her, holding her upright. Her blood boiled. How dare he? The crowd, the rain, the entire world around them ceased to exist in her mind. All she could focus on was the humiliating scene in front of her. Ake, holding her as though she needed him. Her body stiffened in fury, and she stepped back abruptly, breaking his hold. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low but deadly. Her hands twitched, the overwhelming urge to strike him or do something, anything, to erase the moment where Ake had dared to touch her. She was about to take a step toward him when suddenly, she felt her mother's arms around her in a tight embrace. "That was beautiful, my dear." Her mother's voice was full of pride and joy. "You were perfect, just perfect." The words were like a dagger to SV's heart, not because of her mother's affection, but because it reminded her of the situation. She couldn't lash out. Not here. Not with her mother watching. She had no choice but to suppress the storm inside her. SV gritted her teeth, forcing herself to swallow the rage bubbling up within her. She turned to her mother, giving a tight-lipped smile as she nodded. SV barely managed to mutter, "I need to go inside," before walking away in a rush, her anger barely contained. Ake felt the sharpness in her movements. He knew better than to think anything had changed between them. If anything, this accidental moment had only deepened the rift. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. What could he say that wouldn't provoke her further? As Ake watched her walk away, a knot formed in his chest. He had thought that maybe, just maybe, there was a flicker of something during that kiss, a moment where they could have connected. But it was clear now that he had been wrong. She was walking away, as she always did, leaving behind nothing but coldness in her wake. SV's mother approached Ake, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you for being there for her," she said, stepping closer. "I know my daughter struggles to let anyone in, but you've managed to break through. No one else has ever done that for her." Ake shifted awkwardly, unsure how to respond. "You may not know each other well yet, but trust me, you two are perfect together. It's as if even nature is working to bring you closer." Her expression softened. Sometimes, the heart knows what the mind hasn't caught up with yet. As she walked away, Ake stood there, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. After some time, as all the guests gathered in the reception hall for the bride and groom's dance, the atmosphere was warm, a stark contrast to the stormy scene outside. People mingled, eagerly awaiting the couple's grand entrance, but the air between Ake and SV remained icy. As soon as they stepped inside, SV moved to the far side of the room, deliberately distancing herself from him. She had no intention of playing the happy bride. Ake's mind raced. The weight of the moment was pressing down on him, heavier than he had anticipated. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. The accidental kiss, the way she had frozen in his arms, and the look in her eyes. There was something deeper there, buried beneath the layers of anger and resentment. As the reception began, Ake found himself sitting with his band members and family at a table, watching SV from across the room. She was surrounded by people, her mother by her side, yet she seemed distant and disconnected. Her eyes never once met his. Time passed slowly. Ake could feel the tension in the room rising. It was only a matter of time before something broke. The way SV was holding herself, so tightly coiled, like a spring ready to snap. He knew she was close to the edge, and when she reached it, there was no telling what would happen. SV, meanwhile, was trapped in her own thoughts. She felt the weight of Ake's gaze on her from across the room, but she refused to look his way. The moment where Ake holding her had shaken her, not because it had stirred any feelings for him. She hated him even more for it, but because it had made her feel weak, vulnerable, and vulnerability was something she couldn't afford. Her mother leaned in, whispering, "You should go to him. Everyone's waiting for the first dax." Eswe's stomach churned at the thought. The last thing she wanted was to be in Ake's arms again, especially in front of all these people. But she knew she had no choice. This was the role she had chosen, the facade she had to maintain for the sake of her mother, for the sake of her pride. She rose from her seat, her movements stiff and robotic, and made her way toward Ake. He stood as she approached, his face unreadable, but she could see the concern in his eyes. He extended his hand to her, and for a brief moment, she hesitated. The weight of her hatred felt too heavy to bear. But then she remembered why she was here, why she had agreed to this charade in the first place. It wasn't for love. It wasn't for him. It was for control, for revenge. She placed her hand in his, her fingers cold against his warmth. They moved to the center of the room, the eyes of the crowd following their every step. The music began to play, a slow, melodic tune that was meant to convey romance, but all Eswe felt was a sense of dread. Ake pulled her closer, his hands resting lightly on her waist, but she remained stiff, unyielding. She didn't look at him, her eyes focused on a point just beyond his shoulder. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how much this affected her. The song played on, but the distance between them felt wider than ever. Ake's heart ached as he held her, feeling the coldness in her body, the hatred radiating from her. He wanted to speak, to say something that would break through the wall she had built, but he knew it was useless. As the song ended, Ake loosened his grip on her, but before he could step back, Eswe leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't think for a second that anything has changed. I still hate you. I'll always hate you." Her words cut deep, sharper than any blade. Ake's breath caught in his throat as he released her, stepping back as she turned and walked away without another word. The storm outside may have passed, but inside, the tempest between them had only just begun.